In 1966, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys went off on a songwriting bender and almost single-handedly created the band's 11th album, Pet Sounds. LSD may have been a big part of the inspiration for this album, but you don't have to be tripping to appreciate how much it deviated from Surfin' USA and California Girls. With a strange assortment of instruments, melancholy lyrics, and several of the Beach Boys' best singles thrown into the mix, this album might not make you want to get up and dance, but it changed the LP forever. It's a contemplative listen, so pour yourself a Malibu sunset and sit back to join us for episode 34 of Toasting the Classics, Pet Sounds. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, the podcast where we take something people call a classic, talk about it, have a drink related to it, and then we decide whether it's still a classic.
Look at you.
Yeah.
It's like you got this down.
That was pithy.
That was pithy.
That was downright pithy. So what are we doing this week?
Oh, by the way, that is you are listening to the melodious sounds.
The mellifluous voice of Dave McArthur.
The golden throat.
Yes.
Of Dave.
Let's not describe me that way, thank you.
Okay, sorry. And Clint Lanier over on this side. So welcome, everybody. This week we are talking about the predecessor to an album we already talked about.
Predecessor, the spiritual predecessor.
Spiritual predecessor. This is the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds.
Pet Sounds.
Debuted in 1966.
Which we mentioned while talking about Sgt. Pepper's.
Correct.
And I was thinking, and I don't think this is something I'm actually going to do, but it'd be kind of fun to sort of follow the rabbit hole when we do one of these episodes, to do the next episode on something that came up. But then I feel like you'd end up just going too far into
Yeah.
Because right now this is the second album from the same couple of years. I don't know. Pretty interesting albums, though. So I think it's kind of beneficial. But
had you ever listened to this whole album before?
I think I did try to listen to it years ago when I had heard it was a good album.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very sleepy, and it didn't grab me right away. So I didn't finish listening to the whole thing.
Well, how would you describe this album? If somebody came up and said, Mr. Golden Throat, how do you describe Pet Sounds?
First of all, that person would, kick that person's butt for calling me that. But no. Yeah, well, I would describe it as, so there's three big tracks on this album, three really famous tracks.
Right.
Really good Beach Boys songs. And it's pretty much an outgrowth of those songs, the rest of the album. It's a lot like that. You don't really notice what's weird about those songs when you hear them as singles as much as when you hear the whole album, and then you're like, this is weird. This is different than other albums. But I would describe this one as pretty chill, as really eclectic in its instrumentation. I thought they were going to be really eclectic, and it's really not. You listen to the album, they're all kind of the same sort of songs, but what's weird is a lot of the musical stuff that's going on underneath.
Right.
The songs themselves kind of sound similar to one another.
Yeah, they do. But they do sound different than pretty much everything else. It did sound different than the things that had come before. And I checked, and the album that came out before this included hits such as Barbara Ann, She's Give Me Good Vibrations, stuff like that. I mean,
I was surprised. Good Vibrations is after this.
Oh, it is after this.
I had to look that up because I actually originally was saying that, if you were a big fan of Good Vibrations and you heard this album, you'd be kind of annoyed.
Yeah, no, that's right.
And I didn't realize it's actually later. And then I listened to Good Vibrations again, and I was like, this is a weird track. This is a really good song.
It has that weird
it's got all kinds of all kinds of stuff going on in it. It's a really cool song. Actually,
but Barbara Ann, what was it? There were a few others like staples.
There's Surfin' USA,
Beach Boys staples, right?
Little Deuce Coupe.
Those came out before this, and then this hits, and it's totally diverges from everything they'd made before. And
I think he had nothing to do with the beach sound. He was not interested in the whole beach thing about the Beach Boys.
He was over it. He'd grown out of it. Well, you have to remember, they made this when he was 16 or 17. They made Surf and Safari, I think.
Yeah. He was super young.
Yeah, and they made it. Was that in the 50s? Yep. No,
I don't think
in
so.
The 50s.
I don't think so. I think their first album is 61.
Yeah,
62.
61, something like that.
Yeah.
Super early though, and
they're almost exactly contemporary with the Beatles.
Right. Well,
it's the years where the Beatles are building their band,
Wilson,
but the Beach Boys hit faster.
Brian Wilson, the guy that wrote this entire thing, was 23 when this came out.
Yeah.
So
super young.
Yeah, he was probably 17 when Surf Safari came out. But by that time, they were superstars by basically being, the kind of goofy surfing stuff. This actually, I think, if it weren't for this album, they would be like Jan and Dean.
What's Jan and Dean?
Exactly. Jan and Dean did.
What is that?
They did, I think, they did another like Won't Come Back from Dead Man's Curve or something like that.
Sure.
They did some of those songs.
It was like snuff music of the late 50s. And,
Well, it was like Little Deuce Coupe, but with a different car.
Right.
That one was like a Mustang and a Jaguar or something.
Well, they were prolific. There's a bunch of hits before
They were
this.
prolific, but it's not something that you hear on the radio anymore,
No.
right? And it's not something that people point out and say, oh, they're as popular as the Beach Boys or something. I said Jan and Dean, and you're like, who?
Yeah.
And
you know who they're kind of like, and this is sort of a different point, but they're kind of like the Four Seasons. There's even the falsetto thing going on, and but they're from different coasts.
Yeah.
And like when I ended up going to see the Four Seasons Broadway show, and I was like, oh man, I didn't know I knew
all of
like
those
10
songs,
songs by the Four Seasons. I had no idea.
Right.
And when I was listening to these, like I know the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
But I went back and picked out some of the singles, and I was like, "Oh, right, there's that one. Oh, and there's this one too."
So what were the three main songs on this? Sloop John B, right?
On this album, it's Sloop John B, God Only Knows, and Wouldn't It Be Nice?
Yeah, Wouldn't It Be Nice?
All of which I think are just bangers. Like those are great songs. I think Paul McCartney said, "God Only Knows" is the best song ever written, and he's not like dead wrong. It's a really good song.
It's a great song, yeah.
I was listening to it like multiple times when I was listening to this album, and I was just like, yeah, like when I was thinking about would I vote for it as a classic, the album, I was like, I think this song alone is almost enough to just be like, this is a terrific album. But you have to separate the two.
Right.
But I was like, this is a good enough song. And Sloop John B is really good too.
Sloop John B is a different one because it was kind of a takeoff of an existing song. I mean,
right,
it's
which I didn't. That's
like a Jamaican kind of like folk song or
might be
something
my
like
my biggest surprise.
Yeah,
it might be that's a cover, but
yeah,
he heard it from the Kingston Trio, so it was a folk song, and I think it's from wherever Nassau is, which is Bermuda.
Bahamas. Oh, is it Bermuda? Okay.
Bahamas, right?
Bahamas, okay.
Nassau in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, it's weird. It totally makes sense when you hear it. It's got a lot of sort of nonsensical stuff going on in the song.
Well, it has. I think it has a lot of references to stuff that like of import in the Bahamas, and we'd be like, huh? And it kind of makes you wonder, like, okay, they're total West Coast guys, a beach boy, and you think of like L.A. and stuff like that, the beach scene, and they're singing about the other side of the world as far as they're concerned.
Well, and then one of their biggest hits ever is Kokomo.
Yeah, Kokomo. Well,
which is all about the Caribbean. That's a whole separate story.
Yeah, we don't go there. That's like when
I read about it. The whole everything about Brian Wilson. Like I wouldn't call it research. I would call it rabbit holing, where I just kept reading about his life. He's a pretty fascinating guy. He's a really interesting guy. Right. So anyway, but yeah, I was reading about that with Kokomo. So.
Kokomo. Let's not talk about Kokomo.
Yeah, no, that's a terrible song.
It's a horrible song.
That's a terrible song. It's from the movie Cocktail, which
again,
I was like, is that a good movie? I never saw it.
It's a terrible movie.
I put it on my list of movies to watch years ago
because
I've never seen it. So I still haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I gather both of those are pop culture things best forgotten.
Was it Cocktail or was it?
It's Cocktail, yeah. Because I thought about doing a drink from Cocktail, but the one most famous drink from Cocktail, which is the Red Eye, sounds horrible. It has like egg in it.
Yeah,
it's
I think that's like a hangover cure or something like that.
Yeah, right. Drinking more. Good idea. I've actually never resorted to that. Thank goodness. I've been told that was
hair of the dog that bit you.
We had this guy. I used to have a job as a mover when I was in college. And out back of the moving company, there was an area for recycling boxes and recycling old stuff, and there was a trailer out there. And there was this wild man that lived in the trailer.
A wild man?
And we would bring him stuff. Yeah. He had these great big Coke bottle glasses and like hair, like stringy black hair all over the place. And we went out there and we were talking to him one time. He said he woke up that morning with a really bad hangover, and he'd already had a six-pack that morning to try to get rid of the hangover, and it wasn't working. I was just like, oh my God. Like,
it just wasn't enough.
Yeah.
He needed more.
Yeah, we called him Crazy Pogo Ball Joe.
Crazy Pogo Ball?
We threw away a Pogo Ball. We were recycling it, and he got it and started jumping on it, and his crazy hair was all over the place. And we were like, okay, that is a really nutty guy. So
Pogo Ball Joe.
He's probably no longer with us, I would guess, from his...
That's funny because the star of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood lived the exact same way. In a trailer.
In a trailer.
Yeah, a little trailer with his dog.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that? Eating...
But not in the back of a moving company.
No, but wasn't it like a drive-in theater that was defunct or something?
Can't remember.
It was like a defunct drive-in theater. He had like weights out in the front. I mean, it was total... It was living the exact same way.
Yeah, that guy was a little healthier than Crazy Pogo Ball
Right.
Joe,
Well, it's because he worked out with those weights out in the front yard. Okay. Was it just me, or is there a lot of like carnival sounds in this in this album.
What it is there's just a lot of odd instruments.
Right.
You know what a theremin is?
Yeah.
It's like that thing where you wave your hands and they don't actually touch you.
Yeah.
There's one of those. There's a guy taking a Coke bottle up and down a slide.
Right.
There's
there's
just all kinds of oddballs.
Bicycle bells like
bicycle
you've got,
bells, right?
all kinds of stuff. And
so it ends up having kind of a carnival sound, like a calliope or something.
Exactly,
like that,
and that took me to the Beatles album.
Right.
Was it Mr. Kite? I think the
benefit of Mr. Kite.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite, yeah, where it's just all carnival sound.
Well, Sgt. Pepper, there's a whole lot of stuff like that on Sgt. Pepper.
Anyway, but so basically, what we've got here is a concept album, and a concept album. From everything I could read, I mean, the definitions are all over the place. Now, this is kind of defined loosely as the first concept album. Okay, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It came to be known as something like Tommy, right?
Exactly, which is not this.
Which is not
like that. This is not a story.
But what it is, it's an album that essentially can't be played live. That's one thing that I got off it, that it somehow veers from like traditional music or musical narrative in a record. One of the big things I think, especially for this one, is that it can't be played live. Like you can't play this thing. They would never play really any of these songs live.
I read Brian Wilson apparently has been playing it live today.
Well, today
but there's
you can.
so much more ability to
today
synthesize.
You can. Well, you can.
Like
You can have all of those sounds
Yeah.
on a key, right?
Yeah.
And but at the time, just like the Beatles, at the time you could not take that on the road. That's why when the Beatles made Sgt. Pepper's, they were like, "We're done touring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're just all we're going to do is studio now." And that's sort of what this became.
Yeah,
and I think that's why some of the other members are a little bit ticked off about it because.
Well, I read an interesting quote about it. They said that, and I think it was actually from Brian Wilson, and he was saying that he kind of needed to have a thing, and that's what this album was, and everybody else was just kind of like, all right, because they were kind of getting to the point, I think, where they thought he was leaving the band. He was looking like Diana Ross or George Michael. It was like, Beach Boys featuring Brian Wilson kind of thing. And I think they were kind of happy. If he wanted to do this album and stay in the band, then they were fine with that. And that's the way it ended up going. Right. Now,
and they all got a payout from it. So,
but everybody made money from it, right? But the whole thing of keeping him in the band afterwards is a super dark. That's a lot of what I was reading. It was like a hostage situation.
Well, he went off the deep end. I mean, he really got
he went off
drugs,
the deep end. But all of them were like feeding him drugs and like keeping him in the band, manipulating him, and making him write things and stuff. It's a really. It's a really fascinating story. Like it's only because he's still alive is the only reason there hasn't been a movie done about it, because it would be like I think that would be great. A biopic about Brian Wilson would be amazing. Yeah, that whole situation is pretty bad. But I think they were happy to let him have this album. And as far as it being a concept album, it's like a musical concept album, if you know what I mean. It's not, like he says, not like Tommy.
Right. It's not a narrative. It's not a story.
This is what I'm doing. This is the first time anybody's done this kind of album, and this is what I'm going to doing.
Right.
And he said he was inspired by Revolver, and how Revolver, there's different recordings of it. I want to say the British recording didn't have it, but the American version didn't have filler, so it would just go from song to song throughout the whole album, and that was the big thing that inspired him. I listened to it on Spotify, and I believe they used the British version, so there were stops between the songs. I couldn't really hear it, but that album is like... I really like the Beatles.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just biased, but I was listening to it. I was like, this album is just amazing. It's just like Sgt. Pepper. Right. It's every song is completely different. It's so much more energy in their music than when you're listening to Beach Boys.
Yeah.
Which the Beach Boys it's good. It's kind of like prog rock. A lot of people say that this is sort of what gave rise to prog rock.
Sure.
And that's a lot of what this feels like.
I think the Beatles had more energy anyway. I mean, I
think just in general.
Like one of my favorite songs is "Shake It Up, Baby." When Lennon sings that song, and it's just he puts everything in it.
But the early Beach Boys
stuff
stuff
turns out he had laryngitis when he made that, and like you hear him and he's like really gravelly and like
twist and shout.
Oh, right? Twist, "Shake It Up, Baby."
Yeah.
It's the same song, right?
Yeah. That's what I was just trying to think. What is that actually called? It's Twist and Shout.
I thought it was "Shake It Up, Baby." All right, but whatever it's called. But I mean, he's like screaming, and his voice is like so raw because his throat is raw, right?
Yeah, but I thought about this a lot.
They're kind of a high energy band versus the Beach Boys is always kind of.
They're a high energy band. I think they're a higher energy band. I think Brian Wilson is like a really introverted, kind of crazy guy. and he's the most talented
He's a
member of the Beach Boys.
Genius savant type
and
of guy?
it's not close.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
No, you're absolutely
If you're
right.
like, who's the most brilliant Beatle, I could make an argument for at least 3 of them.
Yeah.
And Ringo is probably more talented than anybody else in the Beach Boys other than Brian Wilson.
Right.
Just Ringo.
Sure.
And I think the reason why something like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's it's just Brian Wilson's a one-man show.
Yeah.
The other guys, I don't even think.
Well, which song did Brian Wilson do completely by himself? Like nobody
Well,
else?
he's writing with another guy, but
right,
it's
no,
a guy
but there's,
outside
there's
the band.
one that he did the lyrics on, and he sang it, and he just did it himself. Like they didn't have anything to do with it. They didn't come in. They didn't do instruments or anything.
I don't know.
I can't remember one of the
It
songs.
might be God Only Knows. I think God Only Knows is the one that I'm not sure.
Maybe, but
Mostly the process of this album was
Yeah.
with another guy, Tony Asher, I think
it
his
was
name
Caroline No,
Could be.
the one at the very end.
It could
I think that's the one that he did everything, including the vocals on it, and like they had nothing to do with it. Like they weren't
Right.
even in the studio.
Right.
And they're like,
Yeah.
"What's that?"
Yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're singing on a lot of this stuff. In terms of the actual musical talent, I think they're fine. But in
Yeah.
terms of like the songwriting and like the mojo,
Yeah.
it's just all Brian Wilson.
Yeah, it's
I
all
don't
him.
really think they're contributing. That's why Dennis Wilson was like sneaking him drugs, like to be on his side, so he would come in and keep doing things for the band years later, like in the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, because they just couldn't do anything by themselves. Although, in their defense, they did write Kokomo by themselves.
Well,
Brian Wilson was not involved
There you
with
go.
Kokomo. So
Dennis Wilson also famously palled around with Charlie Manson.
yeah, I was going to talk about that's another one of my biggest surprises.
Yeah, he actually lived with them.
It was the
for about
guy-
4 months or something.
So one of their producers, Terry Melker,
Terry Melker. Yeah.
it was his house
Yeah.
where the people were murdered for the Manson murder.
That's right.
So in a way, like Dennis Wilson, like introducing all those people, I think he introduced Charles Manson to Terry Melker.
Something like that. Manson wanted to be.
Manson wrote one of their songs. He wrote
wa-
a Beach Boys
He
song.
wanted to be a musician. Like
Yeah.
that's what he wanted to do.
Right.
And he was absolutely crazy.
He was too crazy. Yeah.
And but Dennis
In
Wilson.
a world where Brian Wilson could be employed, Charles Manson was too
Right.
crazy to exist in that world.
But Dennis
so.
Wilson was like, he was up on drugs. He just got divorced. Here's this guy that has all of these girls around him.
Right.
That they have sex like throughout the day, multiple
Right.
times a day, basically a harem. I just got finished with a great book called Chaos.
Yeah, you were telling me about
And it has part of that is the story. That whole story with Dennis Wilson's part of the story.
that. Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of. Dennis Wilson had a bit of a dark streak to him.
Yeah, definitely. See, he's dead, right? All of them are dead except Brian Wilson, I think.
Are they?
I think so. I think all the original Beach Boys are gone except Brian Wilson somehow.
Got to research
Putting
that.
on 200 pounds over the course of a year and like doing God knows what
God,
kind
how
of
many
drugs.
drugs
And,
he did.
And
He was a hardcore
yeah.
druggist. He was doing LSD and
Speaking of substance
everything
abuse,
else. Yeah, let's do that.
shall we? So I went pretty simple. I really tried to find out what Brian Wilson drank, but it was just all I saw was just whiskey.
Well, he
liked
drank stuff
whiskey.
after LSD. So,
Yeah.
let's
Well,
see.
so yeah, I didn't see anything interesting in terms of that. So I went with a cocktail that seemed vaguely related, which is the Malibu. Let me say this right: Malibu Sunset.
Oh, Malibu Sunset. Okay.
It can't be a Malibu Sunrise. Well, it could be, but that would just be what, like
So
the
what
mountains.
would be in a Malibu Sunset?
The Malibu Sunset? We've got pineapple orange juice
Mm-hmm.
and Malibu, and then we're gonna garnish it with a little bit of maraschino.
So Mike Love is still alive,
Oh, okay.
and
Okay.
and Bruce Johnston. Carl Wilson's dead. No, that was their dad. Of course, he's dead. No, Carl Wilson wasn't their dad.
No, I think he's another brother, isn't he?
Yeah,
There's your
that's a
cocktail.
lovely drink. Malibu Sunset. So it has what in it again?
It is Malibu rum, or which is not rum. I learned. So it's Malibu, orange juice, pineapple juice, and maraschino syrup
In this one.
in this one. Yes,
Cheers.
and I actually shouldn't have. It looked kind of weird, so I stirred it. But you're not supposed to.
Yeah,
It's supposed to
it's
give
supposed
the
to-
impression of the sunset. But
Right.
anyways,
Cheers.
Cheers. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, tasty.
Could drink that all day. That's just like a punch that you'd have. It's kind of like it's a lot like the Sex on the Beach that we did for another show.
Yeah.
Hasn't come out yet, but it's a
Right,
lot. It's a lot like that.
So Malibu rum is more of an infused liqueur, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Which I didn't know that. I thought it was like somehow just flavored rum, coconut flavored rum, which is I think what it says on the
Yeah,
bottle, but
something
I
like
don't
that.
think that's what it is. So.
There are some out there though. There's a company called Crujan,
Uh huh.
which makes some different
think
flavored
I've seen that,
infused
yeah.
rums. Yeah. Now we know this did inspire, according to
According to Paul McCartney.
yeah
Right?
Paul McCartney, this inspired Sgt. Pepper's. So
Which, it's like I said, I just don't hear. It's a lot more subtle or something like that. It's the instrumentation and things like that are like I said, pretty eclectic, but it's nothing like as obviously eclectic as Sgt. Pepper. Also, Sgt. Pepper is just...
but you know, they're standing on the shoulder of somebody else. They're just taking it a step further now, right? Because this is like, oh, we can use doorbells or we can use bicycle bells.
Right.
We can use all this crazy stuff. Supposedly, one of the Beach Boys basically played this record twice for McCartney and Lennon. Like they were partying in London. And I think he was there for the album release in England.
Okay.
And they were like in his hotel room. And he put it on for him, and they listened to the whole thing, and let's listen again.
Yeah.
So they listened to it like twice, and like, wow, that's
great. It was
great.
much bigger in England.
Oh, yeah. It was huge in England.
Yeah.
Which is so funny and actually so typical, right? Here we're like, what do you mean it's not like a hamburger?
Right.
You know, what do you mean an open-faced, you know, something artistic or something, you know?
Yeah, one way to look at it, I was thinking about this. So you have to think about where these albums are from, right? The Beatles are working in London, which in the 1960s is just like this incredibly culturally vibrant place, right? If Brian Wilson was from New York, it would have been equivalently like culture, but they're from L.A. Yeah. They're not even from L.A. They're from like the Valley or something like that. That's not a very culturally vibrant place. You got one guy sitting in his house writing by himself and not having a lot of input from anybody else. I think that's why it's not as like poppy and just like, you know, it just doesn't grab you the same way.
It's as good as it could be for where he was.
Right, exactly. I think, I mean, it's kind of a small town back then, right? I mean, it's not really like the huge city that it is.
I don't know. I mean, Hollywood is still there. They're still doing all the movies and TV and stuff like that.
I guess that's true. I always wonder about Los Angeles.
But you are right. I mean, it is.
As an East Coast guy, I'm suspicious of L.A.
L.A. is very much devoid of culture, or it has been for a long time. I mean, the cultural place is always New York, right?
Yeah.
And then you had Chicago, second city after that. L.A. was always kind of like flashy, more flash and glitz than culture. I mean, there weren't really any artists in L.A., like real artists. Andy Warhol was on the East Coast. They're all on the East Coast.
Yeah. I mean, there's some truth to it. I think a lot of it just has to do with density.
I mean, most writers.
Because what I always notice about Los Angeles is I go there, and if I really, really carefully look around, there's amazing stuff there.
Yeah.
But you can't just, like New York, you just walk down the street and you can't help but trip over amazing things. It's all put together so tightly.
Well, yeah, it is pretty, you know, it's much more, it's not spread out. It used to be like that way in San Francisco, too, but San Francisco's just such a trash heap anymore.
San Francisco can be a little bit of a dump. It's weird. I don't really know. San Francisco is like the way New York was when I was a kid. It's just sketchy everywhere. Yeah. It's a really cool city still.
Yeah, well, but I hope so. I like San Francisco.
You don't want to walk around with your kids at night. Kind of thing, you know, like so it's. Why
is that man squatting on the sidewalk?
Yeah,
just keep walking.
Yeah,
just keep walking.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I think there might be something to that. I mean. And Brian Wilson wasn't really surrounded by artistic people.
Like I said, he's like a one-man show. I think I get the impression he's an absolute genius.
Right.
Right, just an absolute musical genius. But he's just one guy.
And he's probably misunderstood by his brothers and
probably
and the rest of the band because they just want to make go out, sing the hits. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about surfing now and
have some
girls
fun, do some drugs.
Like yeah,
exactly.
And get all the girls and everything else and go on tour. And he's like really thinking about stuff. Plus, he had a condition too. He had like some type of ear condition, I think.
He was deaf in one ear.
Deaf in one ear, and he couldn't tour anymore. He had to stop touring because of that condition.
I didn't really I know he kind of didn't want to tour anymore. I didn't know it could be though.
I think it was like some
nobody really knows what happened to him.
Some type of anxiety disorder too, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
I think a lot of what's going on with him is, like you said, I didn't think about this when I was researching, but he was like 16 or 17 when he became the Beach Boys.
Right.
And I think it's just kind of the child actor phenomenon.
Plus,
it's just
too early.
His
dad was an ass.
His dad was abusing them all the time when they were kids.
Was overbearing.
May have been the person that made him deaf in one ear.
Might have, yes.
That's one of the theories.
Smacking him upside the head. They call it boxing your ear.
In different places, he has said that his father did it. In another place, he said that a kid in the block punched him in the head.
Yeah. I know his dad was an overbearing jerk.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Basically took control and took credit, sold the rights to their own music.
It just seems a lot like what happened to Michael Jackson. It's very similar. If you read about Brian Wilson's history, it's just like
Joe Jackson. Is it Joe Jackson? Is that his dad?
I think so. Yeah.
Wasn't there a singer named Joe Jackson though that was pretty awesome?
Jack Johnson's not awesome. That's the Curious George guy.
No, Jack Johnson's awesome. He was a boxer.
No, not that one. That's a different. That's Unforgivable Blackness guy you're talking about from like 1910 or whatever.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking
That was
about
awesome.
Jack Johnson, the like poor man's Dave Matthews that did the Curious George song for the movie. The guy's
Jack.
not cool. Not cool at all.
You don't like him?
I
He
like
does
the
some good
Curious
songs.
George song because my kids always like
Make
it.
You Banana Pancakes.
I don't know what that is.
That's a song
Oh, okay.
by Jack Johnson.
All right.
The poor man's.
The poor
what'd you
man's
call him?
the poor man's Dave Matthews.
Yeah. So I mean, they had.
So he didn't want to tour anymore.
Well, he was messed up. I mean, the
Right.
point
didn't
is,
want to do the beach thing anymore.
point is the kid was, he came from, he had a past and he had some issues, and so he grows up in the spotlight. Well, his what they would call formative years, totally in the spotlight, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So by the time he's 23, man, he's been all over the world. He's lost a fortune because his dad sold them all out, remade the fortune because they worked really hard. Yeah. So maybe he just needs some type of escape, and that's what this is, I guess.
Yeah, it just sounds like a mess. I mean, it just sounds like a combination of too much power and not enough. It's like you get famous really early,
Yeah.
and then everybody's controlling you to get to use you, and just kept on a cocktail of drugs and alcohol
Right.
and insanity. He had this doctor. Did you hear about the doctor guy? I think
no.
his name's Lundy or something like that. That just kind of weaseled his way into the family, drained off millions and millions of dollars of the Beach Boys royalties and stuff, but like controlled access to Brian Wilson. He was like one of those people in the Middle Ages that was like, like in the Two Towers when Wormtongue controls the king. This guy's
Right,
like Wormtongue,
right.
but in real
Sure,
life.
sure, yeah.
For Brian Wilson. Yeah, he's like a cult almost around the guy kind of situation. But it's a lot of weird California stuff. It all seems very California
Right.
to have like a guru that's controlling your money.
God, it's got to be. 2 years later, Dennis will meet. Actually, I think a year later, Wilson met Manson. So this is 66. Summer of Love was 67.
And Manson Murders are 69, right?
Yeah, 69. So but he meets him, I think, 69. That's when
Okay.
they start hanging out. Crazy, just a crazy time,
It
to live
really
there.
is. It really is. It's I think it's just why I got kind of interested in reading about the guy. It's just a really fascinating time period. Do you remember Wilson Phillips?
I do.
I didn't realize that was his kids.
Yeah.
I think I maybe sort of knew it was, but like two of the girls from Wilson Phillips are Brian Wilson's daughters.
That's right.
How did he ever have daughters? Who was
Isn't
he
their
married?
mom?
I guess he was married, wasn't he? Yeah.
Their mom. I think their mom is in Heart or not.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that
Heart.
Nancy Wilson?
I think so.
Huh. Well, I'm going to look that up while you talk about something else. That's interesting to me. That might be true.
Yeah, she was a musician as well, I believe.
I don't have much to say about Wilson Phillips.
I don't know either.
I just thought that was a funny connection. There's not much to say about that band.
I keep going to all the negative stuff, like Kokomo. That's a negative, pretty negative thing.
Yeah, a lot of this album. So, what's your overall take on listening to it? Did you like the album as you listened to it?
I did. Well, I had never heard the whole album before. I'd heard all the songs, one point or another. Not all.
Okay.
Not all the songs. Those three main songs.
Those three main songs
Yeah,
I
that we talked
definitely
about.
know, but
But it was. I think it was interesting because after listening to Sgt. Pepper's first, and then going back and listening to this one, I could hear influence, like backwards influence, like, oh, I can kind of hear a little bit of like the circus sounds, like I said,
yeah.
Calliope type of stuff. I'm like, oh, maybe that's where they got it from.
But if you had given me Revolver and you said this was the album that led to Sgt. Pepper, I would have just bought it.
Yeah.
Because I hear what's going on in Sgt. Pepper already happening in Revolver.
But
I think a lot of it has to do with
I think a lot of it has to do
Brian
with
Wilson is such a
instrumentation.
good musician that a lot of this stuff is frankly over my head. I read the music theory part of the Wikipedia article about this album, and I was just like, I don't know what this guy's talking about.
Yeah.
I don't understand this.
Right.
There's all these different modes and tones, and I'm just like, it's all just lost on me.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where, because it's a lot of musicians who really like this album.
Right.
It's not so much like your average person. I don't
Well, and then he was influenced by other stuff like Phil Spector's Wall of Sound.
yeah.
Was an influence on him.
Yeah, I went back and listened to a bunch of songs that supposedly have the Wall of Sound.
The
in them.
Wrecking Crew.
They're really good.
Oh, yeah.
A whole bunch of really. It's like what's the Bruce Springsteen song that had it supposedly? Born to Run. And then like that song by the Ronettes. That's the classic Phil Spector one that's got it. That's like one of my favorite songs ever. I'm trying to think what that song is called though. Is it Be My Little Baby?
So what is wall of sound? Wall of sound is essentially replicating each instrument to make it sound like there's 4 of those instruments playing at one time.
But it's also just assaulting you with music from the second the song starts.
Yeah, but it's just so huge, like it's overwhelming. There's literally this huge wall of sound, and so you're
Be My Baby.
Be My Baby, okay. But
if you listen to the beginning of this track.
Okay.
Well, it's not that loud. But there, see?
Yeah.
You see how it starts out?
Do Born to Run, because Born to Run kind of does the same thing.
The second where it starts out, it actually doesn't start that way. It starts out with a boom, 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 but then it's like everything comes in all at once, and that's where you get it.
But it's also, it's also just taking all of those instruments and making them, expanding them.
See, that just right away.
Yeah.
There's a
everything comes in at one
big
time.
loud lick like right at the beginning that just, and it never lets up on you.
So and that's sort of what he does. How come we haven't played any of these?
Played any what?
Of these songs.
Oh, of the songs. Well, because, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's all fair use, right? You could definitely play songs. We haven't been doing that very much. I guess I was always afraid it would sound god-awful. Maybe it will, but... so I don't know how many
Can't
of
sound
these...
any worse than we already are. Come on.
But you hear how that starts.
Yeah. They just all start all at one time, right?
Can't hear the bass.
That was God Only Knows, right?
That's God Only Knows, right? So that one starts out pretty.
And there's some that are so slow. You Still Believe in Me.
A lot of these songs are slow.
I'm Waiting for the Day.
But this album, I listened to it like 3 times getting ready for the show, and each time I listened to it, I liked the album more. Yeah. It's definitely one of those. Which, yeah, like what's going on there?
Yeah, right.
This
is Caroline Nell.
Yeah. Which was actually a single, apparently.
And at the very end of this, remember what happens at the end of the song?
No, what happens at the end of the song? I don't remember that.
You don't remember this?
No.
I listened for it. Remember at the end of some of the Beatles songs?
Yeah. Now that I can hear the influence.
Yeah. So it has this train going by at the very end of it, and then he brings his dogs into the studio and has them go,
start
crazy, barking and everything. Records all that, puts it in there, and that was the last. So that's the last track on the last, on the album. Okay.
Yeah, unless you have, there's 2 versions of the one song. Hold On to Your Ego. So you can get a version that's got "Hold On to Your Ego" as a 13th track after that, because that was the original name of the song. People thought it was too
LSD-ish,
and psychedelic to have that, so they changed the title to something else. But there's 2 versions of that. I know there's an answer.
Yeah,
that's what that song's also called. But
So that's pretty novel, isn't it?
Yeah,
have a train.
That is. That definitely is.
And people speculate, like, what does that mean? Does it mean like a transition or an evolution from something old to something new as a train passes by? Blah blah blah. I don't know.
Yeah, what was he going for there? Right? Was he making a statement? But see, there's a lot of weirdness on Revolver. Like I listened to it the other day. Well, like Yellow Submarine's on there. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of like psychedelic almost type of stuff. A lot of really good songs though.
Yeah.
Eleanor Rigby is like one of my favorite Beatles songs.
That's one of the best songs.
It's really interesting in itself.
I think those can all be played live if they wanted to. Like they could play all of those.
I think so, but they started having trouble with Revolver, and then they definitely had trouble with Sgt. Pepper.
Well, the point of Sgt. Pepper is we can't play any of these,
right?
Like for real, and that sort of Pet Sounds.
I think it was sort of similar. I think they kind of didn't want to travel anymore. They were sort of...
Well, no, the Beach Boys did. Brian Wilson didn't.
Brian Wilson, but I'm saying the Beatles, I think, were kind of like, if this kept us out of touring, that would be kind of okay with us.
We're a studio band, yeah.
But one big thing about Pet Sounds that we haven't mentioned is that, and it seems weird because there were albums, right? But it was a transition. 65, 66 is where it started to transition because the record studios are definitely focused on 45 singles as being what sold.
Right.
They'd have an LP, but it was like to sell the 45s.
Right.
And this was the first time where it was really the idea was, no, this is buy this album, listen to
Right.
the album, you know. And I think it was one of the first big American records that did that.
Right, and actually, Sgt. Pepper's is kind of like that too, because we talked about Strawberry Fields, and what was the other song on? But there was singles were released, and when you release a single, you wouldn't include it on the full album.
Yeah.
So because
Right.
Strawberry Fields was written for Sgt. Pepper's, and there was another one I can't remember.
Penny
what the other
Lane.
one is. Penny Lane, right? They released both of those. I think those are the only singles that never went like gold for the Beatles.
Oh,
And they weren't included on the albums either. So,
I think.
but they never did it again. That was the last one they did that one too.
So this kind of segues into another thing about this album, and a lot of things that were going on in the 60s, is that I think that listening to a full LP, and this may sound like conspiratorial, but I think it might have to do with drugs. I think sitting at home and listening to a whole LP is something you do when you're high. If you think about it, what were people doing with music before that? They'd be listening to one song in the car, or they'd be dancing with their friends and stuff. If people
Right.
stopped dancing and started just chilling and listening to albums.
Yeah, that's a
and
good
I
point.
think it's drugs.
Yeah, that might be a good point.
And it's not just marijuana, it's also LSD, which was big. There's by my count, from what I came up with, which is not exhaustive, at least 2 references to LSD on this album.
Yeah,
Both
what-
of which, as we've learned, would be denied by the artist.
Of
But-
course. What are they?
So in Sloop John B,
Mm-hmm.
it's like we said, it's originally a folk song that had a line that said, this is the worst. Sorry, what did he
Trip.
say?
This is the worst trip I've ever been on.
That's what Brian Wilson wrote.
Yeah.
But he changed the line to say, this is the worst trip I've ever been on.
Right.
Which is an LSD reference. He's talking about having a bad trip.
Right.
Which is not in the original. That's the only line of the song that he changed. And then there was another one. Oh, I know there's an answer. He says people trip through their days.
Oh, right.
And they're pretty subtle references, but I'm pretty sure, considering how much LSD he was doing at the time, that those are references
Yeah.
to doing LSD.
He was doing a lot.
So
But, the Beatles actually openly admit it. Well, no, they don't. Like
they admit they were doing the
Lucy in the
drugs.
Sky with Diamonds, they said, is not,
Yeah,
which is
that's
totally
total
ridiculous.
BS, yeah,
but
absolutely.
even Strawberry Fields, like it starts out, let me take you down, because we're going to Strawberry Fields, nothing is real,
Right.
and nothing to get hung about. I mean, it's like the whole.
It's a lot more, yeah.
Of the lyrics are just all about a trip,
It seems that way to me. Anyway.
Yeah.
I think Brian Wilson actually said that his first LSD trip is when he immediately afterwards he wanted to change the way he did music.
Yeah.
Like this was what came out of, not that he was like high when he did this, but that changed his outlook on everything and just made him want to do different music.
interesting.
Do,
You know, it
do
wasn't
music
the-
that people would use to pray to God.
Oh,
He said.
well, there
which
you
is,
go.
If you ask me, that's someone who's high says something like that.
Now
But
we've gone from there to Mike Tyson licking toads. Did you hear
Mike
about that?
Tyson licked a toad? No, I didn't know that.
Apparently, there's a toad that's somewhere in Mexico, of course, that
I've heard of that. yeah.
it secretes this venom, to keep animals away from, keep them from eating it. And if you lick it, it'll trip you,
There you
basically.
go.
So that's where we are. We're from Brian Wilson creating art to Mike Tyson licking toads.
Licking toads, right.
But at the time, though, LSD wasn't illegal, I don't believe, was it?
I don't know.
I don't think it was.
I don't know.
I don't think it was made illegal until the late 60s, maybe early 70s.
I know there's still a research exemption that you can do.
Right.
You can have LSD in research labs.
Well, I think
even today,
medical
but
too, because people, what do
Maybe.
they call it? They call it
Microdosing.
microdose. Yeah. People microdose as
Heard
well.
of that.
Especially for like PTSD and a lot of kind of traumatic brain injuries and stuff like that, which would actually make sense with Mike Tyson. Get boxed in the head for,
Sure. Sure.
I think he started at 12 years old.
You know, he was actually a Rhodes Scholar before he started boxing.
Was he?
Yeah.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
He was fluent in ancient Greek. And,
That's awesome. Really?
It was just the punching that made him the way he is today.
Made him punchy.
So, did you ever think that the Beach Boys weren't cool?
Did I ever think that the
Did you ever have kind of an impression? Like,
Boys
I don't
weren't
think
cool.
of the Beatles and the Beach Boys on the same coolness vibe.
No.
Like, I kind of thought
Well,
of them as being the
I s-
cheesy.
I see them as something. They're completely different things. I see the
Yeah.
Beatles as intellectual. I really do.
Okay.
The early days, maybe not so much. Because I want to hold your hand 8 days a week. I mean, these are all like
Yeah.
kind of. I mean,
I
they're
don't know about
great,
intellectual, but like genuinely
they're,
artistic.
They're great songs,
Like the later stuff.
but the later stuff is artistic. Well, I don't know.
I don't really know if they're trying to say anything.
It's a bit. Well, it's a higher plane than.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Surf and Safari or something.
Yes, yes.
The
but,
Beach
but like you
Boys,
said, Twist and Shout is on the same level as Surf and
the
USA.
Beach Boys
if you ask
found the
me.
formula and stuck with it for a long time until Wilson did this.
Right.
And then after this, you've got Good Vibrations. What are some other stuff? What came after this?
That's pretty much the last of the stuff that you would
Yeah.
know. I mean, I was looking through it, and there's all these albums I've heard of, but I don't know any of the music.
Right.
Like Smile is a really famous Beach Boys thing that Brian Wilson did that he had years and years that it took him to actually put it out. I don't know anything from that.
Yeah.
But Good Vibrations is after this, and that's maybe like the Beach Boys song, if you ask me.
I remember
in some
that
ways.
from
That's like
a,
their Hey Jude.
There was like
you
a
know?
soda commercial, like Sunkissed soda
Yep.
commercial.
Yep.
And you had a bunch of people running on the beach drinking
Yep.
orange soda.
Absolutely.
Oh, pick
Me
it
too.
up, good.
Yep.
Yeah. I was like all over
But
the
see,
place in
that's
the
why I
70s.
thought of it as being corny.
Yeah.
When I was
'Cause
a
it was
kid,
a commercial?
there weren't Beatles songs on commercials. The Beatles were always kind of, they were like the Disney movies that they wouldn't let you rent
That
on video.
happened
They
after
were like,
Michael Jackson bought their rights.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
eventually
which
they
became-
started. Oh, you mean, did he buy the Beach Boys rights?
No, he bought the Beatles rights.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I'm kind of surprised that happened, but
You never heard that story?
no.
Paul McCartney told Michael Jackson when Michael Jackson was, when Thriller came out, and he was suddenly huge. Famous story. Maybe we should Snopes it just to see, but
Yeah.
but
No, let's just run with it.
supposedly Paul McCartney said, you made all this money, good for you. Now you need to make sure you need to protect it.
Uh-huh.
You need to buy the rights to music because they last forever.
There you go.
So he bought the rights to the Beatles music.
What a jerk.
Michael Jackson did. In fact, I know that happened because after Michael Jackson died, everybody was wondering what happens to the rights to the Beatles music.
Right.
I think Apple might have gotten it.
Apple had it. Well, no, there's Apple Records. I don't think Apple's actually, maybe.
Well, remember, it was
They
never
do
on
have the
iTunes.
albums with a big Apple on it. There was Apple Records,
yeah,
but I think that's separate.
Not the Beatles Apple Records, Apple Music.
may have gotten it too, yeah. Because it eventually came out on iTunes.
Yes,
and,
and for the
then on
longest time,
Spotify. It wasn't on there.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, I remember when it came out.
But
It was a big deal.
people double check that story. Just
Yeah,
double check
somebody
it for me.
double-check that.
I'm pretty sure that's
we'll
true.
relay that to our legal department.
I'm absolutely sure that's true.
Yeah, me too.
Unless it's wrong, and then I will deny it. But in any case, their music was very playable. The Beach Boys.
We were talking about I was talking about how I always thought of them as being kind of lame because they were like in Sunkissed commercials and
Right.
stuff like that when I was a kid. And then even worse was Kokomo. And then at the same time as Kokomo, they were on Full House, which if you ask me is just like,
Yeah.
if you ever want to be cool, do not appear on Full House. Like I thought of Elvis as being lame because Elvis was always on, not Elvis himself, but the music and like references to Elvis.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
always like, oh, this must be super lame because it's on Full
Right,
House.
right.
Like this is where things go to die culturally, if you ask
Yeah.
me. But I guess I always just thought. But this listening to this album and then hearing Good Vibrations again with this like sort of avant-garde-ish sort of Brian Wilson version of the Beach Boys, it makes Beach Boys seem a lot cooler.
Okay, but does it make the Beach Boys seem cooler?
No.
Right.
The Beach Boys music seems cooler, yeah.
Brian Wilson's
Yes, I
Beach Boys
actually
sound cooler.
super unimpressed with it. I think Mike Love didn't seem to come out too badly from what I read, but like Dennis Wilson and the other guys just come out seeming like scumbuckets.
Well,
like,
they were just all. I mean, they were hanger-on.
Yeah.
Hangers-on.
yeah,
whatever you say
hangers
it.
on. Yeah, hangers on. There you go.
Plural of it. Brian was obviously the brains behind the music,
Mm-hmm.
and he evolved, and that's what you do when you're
Right.
when you're an artist. You evolve, right? You change, and even if you're at the top of your game, that's why Tiger Woods would always change his golf swing, even when he's like at the top of his game. He's working on how do I make it better, you know?
Right. Right.
And people would be like, "What are you doing? That was working for you." He wasn't happy with it. He wasn't satisfied. They were totally satisfied. They're like,
Yeah.
come on, I want to travel around
Yeah.
the world
Yeah.
singing, California Girls." And
Well, that's the other difference between them and the Beatles is, like I said, like you've got the three, like just I think you could safely say like three musical geniuses in the Beatles.
artists at the very least.
Three great artists in the Beatles,
Yeah.
and they had trouble keeping it together,
Yeah.
and the band spun apart because everybody was going off in their own directions.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is like one guy who, if they kept him high and locked in a room,
Right.
they could keep being the Beach Boys
Yeah.
forever, which is exactly what everybody else wanted to do.
Right.
Like I don't think Dennis Wilson was like, oh yeah, I need to go off and do my own solo thing because I'm
Sure.
an amazing artist.
I'm
He
an
was
amazing
He was
drummer.
like,
Well,
did
he
we
was
keep
a-
getting checks for the movie?
He was
music?
a drummer after all, so
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to. I guess there's probably some bands where the drummer is a.
well, the Eagles, right?
I don't know. I don't know the guys in the Eagles. Who's it's Glenn
Don
Frey.
Henley.
Don Henley is
Yeah,
the
he's
drummer?
yeah.
Okay, well, but he could
Then
sing.
you had Genesis. Phil Collins was a drummer.
Genesis is a good example. Yeah, that's true. And he went off solo.
Yeah.
But that was Robert Palmer had already left the band by that point, right?
Yeah, but he took over.
So Phil Collins was sort of like the Phil Collins show,
Yeah.
wasn't it? I think.
Do you know the names of the other members of
I
Genesis?
don't.
There
No,
you
I
go.
have no idea. So
Alrighty then.
yeah. So I think maybe it's kind of similar. But yeah, you're right. He's the drummer, and he was sort of the artist in the group.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. I'm just talking out of my butt. I do not have any analysis
Hey,
of Genesis.
the dude writes
up to
stuff
hand.
for Disney. Okay, they only let the best do that.
Have you
Elton
seen the
John.
memes where they're like, no, just write a song for Tarzan. It's not a big deal. Then they show like him with the piano on fire. I was like, I don't know if that song's that good, but yes, it's okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's that good either.
I
Anyway,
can't even remember how it goes, but
did Paul McCartney ever write anything for Disney?
that's a good question. I don't.
I want to think that he did.
You know what I found out the other day? I found out that
I don't think I
at
did.
the end of Space Jam, when Bugs Bunny raps,
Yeah.
that's Jay-Z wrote that.
Are you kidding me?
No.
Guy's got his hands in everything.
I mean, I think it's before he was famous. I think they were just like, hey, kid, you want to write something
Yeah.
for Space Jam? And he was like,
Who can
yeah,
we
I
get?
guess.
Oh, this guy's cheap.
Yeah, he probably, right? Because that was like
Now he's worth like $2 billion.
1993,
3 billion,
1992, something like that. So
Yeah.
anyway, again, also something I didn't look up. Might not be true, but I think it's true.
We do the minimal amount of research for the show.
Minimal amount of research. That's exactly
So,
right.
Just
did-
enough to make us sound like we know what we're talking about.
Did you get where they got the name of the album from?
Oh, yeah, the San Diego Zoo.
Yeah, they just went to do
yeah.
a photo shoot of San Diego.
Yeah, let's call it Pet Sounds.
Again, the lameness of the Beach Boys.
Right.
Their idea for the photo shoot was to go and have a bunch of goats at the San Diego
San Diego Zoo.
And then you look at Revolver,
Yeah.
and it's this like brilliant piece of
Right.
artwork with all of
Right.
their faces and things done together. And then Sergeant Pepper. And
Oh,
you're just like,
the
come
cover
on,
for Sergeant
man.
Pepper is they hired an artist to do
hey
that.
man,
yeah.
you want to go down to the zoo and take some pictures?
Hey, I got an idea. We're gonna be in San Diego surfing, man. It's gonna be rad. Hey, let's go to the zoo. Take pictures for the album.
Exactly.
And he's like wearing a turtleneck with a jacket over the turtleneck, like a 2-button jacket,
Right, because it might have been 50 degrees in San Diego that day. Yeah.
with a bunch of feeding goats, and that was Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
Ugh.
You'd like to think that was kind of like ironic or something, but I think they were just kind of whack.
I think
I don't think they were that cool. I think they just went down to the zoo
Yeah.
to take pictures. But
Do
So-
you think it was just kind of like it seemed like to me, reading about it, like to Brian Wilson, this is something he had to get out of his system.
yeah,
To the others, it was a paycheck.
yeah,
That's all it was.
that is what it sounded like.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
it
totally a
didn't sound
paycheck.
like they had a lot of creative contribution
Not at all.
whatsoever. Now they did sing and things like that.
But they didn't. They never played. They didn't play on this album at all, did they? I don't think
know.
they did.
I know they do vocals on a couple of the tracks.
Yeah, they had to, but I think I don't think they actually did any of the instruments
Yeah.
on this album.
Yeah.
I think it was all the session but
So tons of bands talk about this as being hugely influential, especially like indie rock.
Yeah.
I feel like all that indie rock that came out from like, I don't know, say in 96 to like 2010, like all those guys would be like, what's your favorite album? And they'd be like Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys.
really.
Yeah. So many people said that. It might be where I heard about this as being like a classic album. It's just from hearing a lot of
Were they
those.
saying that to be like
It's hard to tell, right?
esoteric?
Are they saying that because they're trying to be weird, or is it
Yeah.
true? Maybe it's true. I don't know. So, I mean, it's also the
Or they-
Brian Wilson mythos is kind of fascinating, right?
well,
so
Brian,
you could kind of
Brian Wilson is
In
But
fact-
were they saying it because McCartney said it?
Well,
you know?
one of the things I forgot to mention was that we talked about how it was way more successful in Britain, right? But one thing they did is they released the album stateside and it didn't do great. So they got like a PR guy, and he created this campaign talking about this album was created by the musical genius Brian Wilson. And they brought that to England, and it totally worked.
Took off-
and it
took
might
off
have been
after
part
that,
of why it
yeah.
was successful there, because they came out and they were like, listen to this album by this crazy musical genius, and people
Right.
were like, whoa, man, this is an album
Yes.
by a crazy musical genius. You know?
Right.
So
Well, in the States, what they did, I can't remember the name of it. Is it Columbia? Whoever released
Capitol
it.
Records.
Capitol. They released this. 2 months later, they released the greatest hits.
of the Beach Boys.
And essentially buried this album because
wow, yeah.
they were so embarrassed by it.
Well,
They-
Brian Wilson was devastated by the performance
Yeah.
of the album. It may have been one of the things that sort of tipped him off into his years of like depression and
Right.
stuff like that. He had trouble getting up off the mat.
I think they spent like $70,000 on this album, which
I have no idea
at
whether
the
that's
time-
a lot or a little.
Let me
I
look it
think
up.
no. You know what I
think
read?
I think it was a lot.
I think he spent several $100,000 producing Good Vibrations. I think it was
Alone.
the most anybody had ever put on a single,
On a single.
at the time. And that ended up
think.
making its money back, but I guess that would be hard to judge. Did you want another hit?
Yeah. Give me another hit. That's a good way to put it here. Yeah, I think it was an insane
70,000
amount.
would be...
So 70,000. I was
Okay.
right about that. Making it one of the most expensive albums ever recorded at the time. So it's 560 grand today.
Okay.
That's how much it cost just to produce the album.
That seems like what you might spend on an album. I don't know. That doesn't,
$500,000?
For a big band?
$500,000 on
Yeah.
on a
Does it seem like a lot or a little?
seems like a lot. I don't know if you'd pay $500,000 to produce a.
Well, I don't know about 2021 because the music industry's completely changed.
Yeah.
But like when we were kids,
people
if you
make
told me
s-
Guns N' Roses spent $500,000 producing their album, I'd be like, yeah, sure.
Well,
like a big
maybe
deal.
I don't know.
That doesn't.
I
Seem
think
right.
there's like a Blink 182.
They used to spend that much on videos. People used to spend $1 million to put out a music video when we were kids.
Well, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, anyway, it was more than anybody had ever spent
Yeah.
at that point. So.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it made back its money, but it was a big disappointment to him. I don't think it. I don't know whether the Beatles albums, the two albums that we've talked about, would have given birth to prog rock, which is for me is kind of a mixed bag about
Yeah.
whether I'd be like, oh, what can we do? But like Queen,
Right,
you
sure.
couldn't have Queen without prog rock, and
Yeah.
Queen's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So. A lot of the other stuff, sometimes it's okay. I don't really have a lot to say about all the revolutionary time signatures and stuff that people use. I'm like, that's kind of boring to me. I don't have enough musical knowledge to enjoy that. But those are my big things. I think towards this being an important album is the direction of music and the direction of albums and just a lot, like you said, a lot of the things influence even just on Sgt. Pepper's.
Right.
It's a lot of stuff like that. So is it time to talk about biggest surprise?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. What was your biggest surprise?
I guess my biggest. I didn't realize that Brian Wilson basically, this was his album. It should have been Brian Wilson. Pet Sounds.
Okay.
I guess I was surprised by how little the Beach Boys had anything to do with it. They came along. He'd already had it written. He'd already had everything arranged. They came to the studio, laid down the vocals, got the paycheck, and left. That was it.
Uh-huh.
So that was my biggest surprise. Was I always thought it was the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds.
Right.
But learning this told me a lot about the Beach Boys. That the Beach Boys are just kind of a cover band for Brian Wilson.
Yeah, sort of.
You know,
Yeah, sure.
If you think about it, I mean, they're kind of like a boy band, what we would call a boy band.
Yeah.
Like NSYNC never wrote any of that stuff. It was a group of writers.
But
wrote
it'd be
it,
like if
everything
Justin
else.
Timberlake did.
Right.
Like if he was just
Yeah,
writing all of NSYNC
exactly.
songs and then the other guys would go out and dance.
Exactly.
Like, it'd be like that.
And I would look at him in a whole new light,
yeah.
but I
Yeah.
don't because he didn't.
That
But
would be fun to
But
do.
it would be like that. So it would be like if one member of NSYNC actually knew music,
Yeah.
and could arrange music and write lyrics and everything else.
Well, in
And
his
the
defense,
rest
I
of
think
them
he
just-
probably does, but I don't think he wrote the music. But I think he's probably pretty.
Yeah. Oh no,
I think he knows
he's
his music to some extent.
he's
Yeah.
definitely probably
Yeah.
more than likely talented, maybe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Most likely.
yeah, maybe. So that was my surprise. It was just how I mean I knew that he was kind of considered the brains behind the Beach Boys. I just didn't realize it was this much. So
Right.
How about you? Now that I've blown all your surprises.
Yeah, a couple of them were killed, but the direct connection to Charles Manson was a huge surprise.
That
for me.
was
I
a
was like,
big one,
okay,
yeah.
so far I think I've had a couple that have been about serial killers. Like, there was the one about the Unabomber.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was one of my surprises. I don't
Yeah.
know. That stuff that's interesting to me. I
Yeah.
don't know, for some reason.
Kind of weird stuff.
It is weird stuff. So the Charles Manson thing, the Carney Wilson thing, her being his daughter.
Yeah.
And then the other one was that Good Vibrations was not one of their first hits. It was more like one of their last
hits, yeah.
That's weird. That surprised
Yeah.
me. I was surprised by that.
But then again, when you
and
listen
also
to
it was
it,
when I listened to it, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, obviously this
Yeah,
is a way
now-
more sophisticated
now I
sound.
get it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally get
Yeah,
it.
now
I
I
just
get it.
in my head, I'm just like, oh, think about good.
But
It
you
just
listen
sounds
to
like
music,
a pop song
yeah, you listen
from
to
the
music,
Sunkist
it's
commercial or
pretty
whatever
crazy,
the heck
yeah.
it was, or Orange Crush, as you said.
Yeah.
So that'd probably be my biggest surprise, one of those things. We sort of talked about them already. We didn't preserve them for the close of
Yeah.
the show, as is our wont. So I think we have to talk about whether we're going to toast it, which to me is an interesting question for this one.
Yeah. I think.
And I think we should continue. So I know it's yours is the deciding vote,
Right.
because obviously if it's a tie, but
Sure.
I think we should talk about whether we would vote about it individually as well. Not just, oh, what does Clint think? But like, because I don't know what to do either. I'm sort of on the fence.
I would actually vote this as a classic.
You would
yeah.
you would toast this.
Yeah, I would toast this.
Yeah, like I said, any album that has God Only Knows, which I think is one of my favorite pop tracks of all time,
Yeah.
would already be pretty close. And
Right.
just the history of the album, knowing about the guy that wrote it and its influence on other things, I think I don't really want to listen to this album so many times because it's so sleepy.
Yeah.
And sounds old.
I'm the same way, but you know what?
But
I think when somebody does something new and it at least sort of works, because this guy, this is new. This is a concept album, and that nobody had done this.
Right.
Nobody used Coke bottles on slides and all this other crazy stuff, and used that in the arrangement, right? Nobody had ever done that before.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it might have been tripping, but part of it is also just being able to think about, wow, I think this will work. Just thinking to yourself and like, and being in that zone.
And when you've got when modern listeners listen to it and they're like, oh, this is a good album, but like almost everybody rejected it at the time.
Right.
That's always an indication to me that you really did something special.
Yeah.
It's like everybody rejecting Monet.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, this is crap. But everybody today looks at it and they're like, this is amazing.
Yeah, this is genius. Right. Yeah.
I think that's a good indicator that you
Or
did
Picasso
something.
or something like
Right.
that.
You broke new ground.
Right.
And I think that's kind of
Right.
it's part of being a classic, right?
Right.
In some ways, some of the classics aren't really breaking new ground.
And that's sort
I
of,
guess,
and I've talked about it before, but Picasso famously said that I had to learn, when I was 12, I had to learn to paint like a master so that when I was old, I could paint like a child.
Right.
And it's kind of like knowing the rules so that you can break them. You have to know the rules first.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so they come along with this totally in the era, pop-driven, pop song.
And I imagine Brian Wilson probably felt in 1965 like he had mastered pop music.
Exactly.
And nothing to learn from the way it was
So
really
I'm going to
done.
break the rules now because
Right, so I'm gonna break
I've
the rules,
gone as far as I can go here.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is like he could have been safe and I'm just going to keep burning this candle for as long as I can because that's what the other members wanted.
No,
you know?
yeah. Guy like that,
And-
with the
and-
musical sensibilities that he had, he would have killed himself.
And you're
if
right.
he'd done
All
that.
the Beatles did that because they progressed from day
They all
one.
progressed,
You know,
I think Ringo
So-
would have been happy to just drum in the Beatles for 50 years.
Yeah,
Now, I'm not saying he's
yeah.
not talented. He is. And
Right.
in some ways, he might kind of be one of my favorite Beatle in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he was like, I'm playing drums in the Beatles.
Right.
I'm not leaving this.
Yeah.
You're going to have to pry my cold, dead hands away from these drumsticks.
although he
you
did
know?
quit.
Well, Paul
He-
sued
he-
to break up the band, and everybody ended up.
No, he quit
with it.
before then.
Is that right?
Yeah, because the infighting
okay.
got so bad between John and Paul before they broke up.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
That he's like, you know what, guys, I'm done. And they tried to do, I think it might have been Revolver without him, and they're like,
like early on. he
yeah,
left.
and they're
okay.
they're like, you need to come back. We need you back. You're the only one that can really kind of sort of do this. So I just, I look at someone who takes a chance, throwing away everything that he did before. To do something new.
You got to
And
respect that.
You got to
right?
respect that.
Even if the result isn't something that like is my favorite album to listen to.
But the result's still good. That's what I'm saying.
No, it's still a good album,
It it's not terrible.
No.
It's certainly different. It's not poppy. It's not finger snapping. But maybe he wanted to get away from that because that's all the stuff was before. And he was like tired of chewing bubble gum and singing about California girls and stuff. I mean, he had enough.
There's a song we didn't mention.
Yeah, California Girls.
Right,
So,
of course.
but I mean,
Which the Beatles covered kind of in on the White Album with Back in the USSR.
oh, back in the USSR.
When they're like,
yeah.
the Ukraine girls really knock me. And it's
Right,
it's a Beach Boys
Yeah,
cover basically.
total.
I
Yeah.
totally forgot about
Yeah,
that.
me too. But anyway, so yeah, I will toast this one.
All right,
sure.
great.
All right.
Well, then I'm going to lean over and say I toast it as well and make it unanimous because I think that's what I was going to do anyway. So.
Perfect. Well, we hope you enjoyed this wonderful, special episode of Toasting the Classics. And
Is this a special episode? Is this one where I get molested or something? What's special about this episode?
no, anytime I've got the golden throat in front of me,
Oh, God.
I have the opportunity to have a good conversation
Right.
with you.
So they're all special.
They're all
episodes, you're
special,
saying. Yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
So I hope you will join us again next time. What are we doing next time?
Next time we are back to book, and it's a book of your choosing, which has been very long.
Oh, that short story.
Yes, the short story Catch 22,
Yes.
which I'm still working on. Hopefully I think I'll be able to get it finished, but
Never want to see the name Usarian
yes,
ever
I'm
again.
crawling through this book, so we will.
Right. Well, thanks for sticking with it. It'll be worth it. And thank you for sticking with us. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends.
Yes, that really does help the podcast get listened to. The more we trip up Apple's algorithms, the better we do. So
Absolutely.
we want to fool the man.
Yes. As much as possible. So thanks for joining us. And until next time,
Toasting the Classics is out.
bye.
That's it for episode 34 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, check the notes next week for the drink for our discussion of Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22. Sorry about the delay. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know who's better, the Beach Boys or the Beatles. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.